The world watched in disbelief as the unthinkable happened. Sirens screamed across Tel Aviv, a city long seen as a fortress. For the first time, Iranian missiles rained down, breaking through Israel's famed defenses and striking its vibrant heart. The images that followed were stark and shocking, showing destruction and chaos in a place that believed itself untouchable by such direct attacks. This was not a proxy war fought through other groups in distant lands. This was a direct, bold strike from one regional superpower against another. The psychological barrier that had held for decades was shattered in a single night, leaving the world to grapple with a terrifying new reality in the Middle East. This escalation was not supposed to happen. Israel's initial surprise attack on Iran was meant to be a swift, decisive blow. The plan was to cripple Iran's military and nuclear infrastructure, forcing its leaders to the negotiating table from a position of weakness. But the plan backfired spectacularly. Instead of collapsing, Iran struck back with a force and precision that stunned military analysts. The missiles that hit Tel Aviv were a clear message. Iran was not a weak state that would simply absorb a punch. It was a formidable power with the will and the means to inflict serious pain, changing the entire dynamic of the conflict and the region. The global reaction was a mix of fear and condemnation. For years, the international community had worked to contain the tensions between Iran and Israel. Diplomats had shuttled back and forth trying to keep a fragile peace. Now, all that effort seemed to lie in ruins. The conflict had moved from the shadows into the open, threatening to pull in other nations and spiral into a much larger war. World leaders scrambled to respond, calling for calm and restraint, but their words seemed to carry little weight against the roar of missiles and the drumbeat of war, as both sides appeared locked on a dangerous path of escalation. Even the most powerful voices seemed uncertain. United States President Donald Trump, who first praised Israel's strike as a great act, quickly changed his tune. Within 48 hours he was calling for the war to stop and pushing for a diplomatic solution. This rapid shift showed just how badly the situation had spun out of control. No one, not even America's leaders, had anticipated Iran's powerful response. The world was now in uncharted territory. A war that was meant to be a quick Israeli victory had instead opened a Pandora's box of instability, with consequences that would be felt far beyond the borders of the Middle East. Israel's decision to attack Iran was a high-stakes gamble driven by a combination of fear, politics, and a deep misreading of its enemy. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his government believed a surprise strike would achieve several key goals at once. First and foremost, they aimed to neutralize Iran's nuclear program, which Israel has long viewed as an existential threat. The belief was that a targeted assault could set back Iran's progress by years, if not permanently. They thought this would reassert Israeli dominance in the region and show the world that Israel would not hesitate to act alone to protect its interests. The plan was also based on flawed intelligence and assumptions. Israeli leaders were confident that their Mossad intelligence agency had infiltrated Iran deeply enough to know exactly where to strike for maximum effect. They also believed that Iran's allies in the region, like Hezbollah in Lebanon and other groups in Syria, were too weak to offer significant help. Netanyahu's government expected the Iranian people, supposedly unhappy with their leaders, might even rise up in dissent when faced with a military defeat. This combination of factors created a sense of overconfidence in Jerusalem, leading them to believe that a quick, clean victory was within reach. However, domestic politics played a crucial role in this risky decision. Prime Minister Netanyahu was facing immense pressure at home, his governing coalition was fragile and on the verge of collapse, and he was personally entangled in corruption trials that threatened his political career. For a leader in such a precarious position, a successful foreign war can be a powerful distraction. A decisive victory against Iran could have united the country behind him, silenced his critics, and secured his legacy. This political desperation likely clouded his judgment, pushing him to take a risk that a more secure leader might have avoided. But the calculation was wrong on every level. The attack did not paralyze Iran, it did not incite a popular uprising. And it certainly did not force Iran to the negotiating table as a weakened party. Instead, it united the Iranian people behind their government against a foreign aggressor. It exposed the limits of Israeli intelligence and military power. The gamble had failed, leaving Israel in a more dangerous position than before. It was now facing a direct, full-blown conflict with a powerful and determined enemy, a scenario it had worked for decades to avoid. The intended show of strength had turned into a demonstration of strategic failure. The world, and especially Israel, fundamentally underestimated Iran's resilience and military capability. For over 4 decades, Iran has been shaped by sanctions, isolation, and constant hostility. This pressure did not break the country, it forged it into a self-reliant and determined power. Cut off from buying advanced weapons from the West, Iran invested heavily in developing its own military-industrial complex. It built a formidable arsenal of ballistic missiles, drones, and other weapon systems designed specifically to counter the strengths of its adversaries, including the United States and Israel. This long-term strategy created a powerful deterrent that was overlooked by its rivals. Iran's military doctrine is not based on matching the high-tech air forces of its enemies plane for plane. Instead, it focuses on asymmetric warfare. This means using its strengths, like missiles, drones, and regional allies, to exploit the weaknesses of its opponents. Its nuclear facilities are not exposed targets, they are reportedly fortified and buried deep underground, making them incredibly difficult to destroy. When the International Atomic Energy Agency passed a resolution against Iran, Tehran's response was not to back down. It announced plans for a third uranium enrichment plant, signaling that it would not be intimidated and could rebuild whatever was destroyed. The experience of past conflicts has also hardened Iran. The brutal 8-year war with Iraq in the 1980s taught the nation bitter lessons about survival and the need for a strong defense. During that war, the world largely supported Iraq's Saddam Hussein, leaving Iran to fight alone. This painful memory is deeply ingrained in the country's psyche and has driven its quest for strategic independence. Iran's leaders vowed to never again be in a position where they were unable to defend themselves or strike back. The recent missile attack on Tel Aviv was the ultimate expression of this long-held promise to its people. This strength is not just about hardware, it is also about strategic depth. Iran has spent years building a network of allies and proxy forces across the Middle East, from Hezbollah in Lebanon to the Houthis in Yemen. This so-called axis of resistance allows Iran to project power far beyond its borders and challenge its enemies on multiple fronts. Israel's calculation that these allies were weak was a grave error. These groups are battle-hardened and loyal, providing Iran with a crucial strategic advantage. The strike on Tel Aviv proved that Iran was not just a regional troublemaker, but a major military power capable of challenging the established order. The escalating war between Iran and Israel has forced the world's major powers into a delicate and, honestly, pretty dangerous balancing act. The United States, Israel's closest ally, finds itself in a particularly difficult position. While President Trump's administration has been vocally supportive of Israel, it is deeply wary of being dragged into a full-scale war with Iran. The United States has made it clear to Israel that it will not participate directly in any offensive strikes. Instead, it is focusing on providing defensive support and intelligence while urgently pushing for a diplomatic off-ramp. The partial evacuation of diplomatic staff from the region really underscores the seriousness of the situation and Washington's desire to avoid American casualties. Meanwhile, other global giants, China and Russia, have taken a different stance. Both nations quickly condemned Israel's initial attack, framing it as an act of aggression that violated international law. For them, the conflict is not just a regional crisis, but an opportunity to challenge American influence in the Middle East. Russia, with its significant military presence in Syria, is actively working to contain the conflict and position itself as a key mediator. China, heavily dependent on Middle Eastern oil, is primarily concerned with stability and has called on all sides to de-escalate, fearing the economic consequences of a wider war. Their unified position puts them at odds with the West, highlighting the growing geopolitical divides. International bodies and European powers are also scrambling to respond. The United Kingdom has warned of new threats to commercial shipping in the vital waterways of the Middle East, a sign of the conflict's potential to disrupt global trade. In Vienna, the IAEA remains a key forum for diplomacy, though its recent resolution against Iran was seen by Tehran as a political move that only fueled the fire. A 6th round of nuclear talks between the United States and Iran, set to take place in Oman, now carries immense weight. These negotiations are no longer just about uranium enrichment, they are about pulling two nations back from the brink of a devastating war. The crisis has revealed the complex web of alliances and rivalries that defines modern global politics. Each country is pursuing its own interests, The United States wants to support its ally without getting entangled in another war. Russia and China see a chance to increase their own power and prestige. European nations are desperate to avoid an economic and refugee crisis on their doorstep. But as all these powers navigate the situation, the people of Iran and Israel are the ones living under the threat of daily attacks. The international response has so far been a collection of cautious statements and behind-the-scenes maneuvers, while the conflict on the ground continues to burn. The direct military conflict between Iran and Israel has sent immediate and powerful shockwaves through the global economy. The most visible impact was on the price of oil. As soon as news of the attacks broke, oil prices surged by more than $7 a barrel. This sharp increase is not just a number on a trader's screen, it is a preview of the pain to come for consumers around the world. Higher oil prices mean more expensive gasoline at the pump, higher costs for heating homes, and increased expenses for businesses that rely on transportation. This acts as a tax on the entire global economy, threatening to fuel inflation and slow down economic growth, just as many countries are recovering. The fear driving the markets is centered on the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway is the world's most important oil choke point, with about a fifth of all globally consumed oil passing through it every day. Iran has long held the ability to disrupt or even close this vital artery, and in a full-blown war it would almost certainly use this leverage. The mere threat of closure is enough to cause panic in the markets. A prolonged disruption would be catastrophic, choking off a huge portion of the world's energy supply and sending oil prices to unprecedented heights. This would trigger a global recession, impacting every country and every household. Beyond oil, the conflict threatens to snarl global supply chains that are already fragile. The Middle East is a critical crossroads for international shipping, with huge volumes of goods passing through the Suez Canal and the waters around the Arabian Peninsula. The United Kingdom has already issued warnings about new threats to commercial ships in the region. Shipping companies may be forced to reroute their vessels, taking longer and more expensive paths around Africa. This would lead to delays and higher costs for everything from electronics to clothing, feeding into the inflationary pressures that are already squeezing family budgets across the world. This economic fallout demonstrates how interconnected our world has become. A regional conflict can no longer be contained within its borders. Its consequences are felt in the wallets of people thousands of miles away. Governments are now facing a difficult choice: how to respond to the military crisis without worsening the economic one. Sanctions, while a common tool, could further restrict oil supplies and push prices even higher. The war is not just being fought with missiles and drones. It is also a wallet war, where the stability of the global economy hangs in the balance, held hostage by the escalating violence in the Middle East. The war between Iran and Israel is more than just another conflict in a troubled region. It is a defining moment that is fundamentally reshaping global politics. It marks the end of an era where proxy wars and covert operations were the primary tools of statecraft in the Middle East. The direct missile strikes on Tel Aviv have shattered old assumptions and redrawn the map of power. Iran has forcefully announced its arrival as a top-tier military power, one that is not afraid to engage in direct confrontation. This shift is forcing every nation, from regional neighbors to global superpowers, to recalculate their strategies and alliances. This crisis has starkly revealed a grim truth about the current state of the world. Raw power matters more than international law, diplomacy, or the pursuit of peace. Israel, a nuclear-armed state that has not signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, launched an attack on Iran over its nuclear program. Iran in turn retaliated with overwhelming force rather than relying on the United Nations to act. In this new, harsher environment, the ability to project military strength is seen as the ultimate guarantee of security. The calls for de-escalation from world leaders seem weak and ineffective when faced with the hard reality of national interest backed by military might. The conflict is also accelerating the transition to a more multipolar world. The United States, while still a formidable power, is no longer the sole architect of events in the Middle East. Its hesitation to get directly involved and its shifting public statements show the limits of its influence. In this vacuum, other powers like China and Russia are stepping forward, eager to expand their roles. This creates a more complex and less predictable global landscape where rivalries are sharper and the potential for miscalculation is greater. The old order, dominated by a single superpower, is fading, and a new, more chaotic system is emerging in its place. Ultimately, this war is a tragic lesson in the enduring dynamics of power politics. The hopes for a world governed by shared values and international cooperation seem more distant than ever. Instead, we are seeing a return to a more primitive logic, where nations prioritize their own survival and dominance above all else. The conflict is a reminder that peace is fragile, and that the thirst for power remains one of the most powerful forces in human history. As the world watches the events in the Middle East unfold, it is clear that we have entered a new and more dangerous chapter, one where the balance of power is being decided not at the negotiating table, but on the battlefield.